My mother negotiated how much to sell me for with my buyers in front of me. That was the moment I knew I had to do something. Fast forward to today. She saw me on the news, dropped her new baby, and hasn't stopped shaking. In my village, childless couples could borrow relatives' children for months at a time. My parents called it blessed charity, helping barren women feel like mothers while earning money for the family. What they didn't mention was that lone children don't get justice. I was 4 when it started, loaned to Aunt Fatma, who'd tried for 10 years to conceive. She called me Amira and made me drink bitter herbs mixed with cow dung every morning. For fertility, she'd say with a smile. I remember crying into my pillow at night, scratching until I bled, whispering my real name over and over so I wouldn't forget it. By 7, I'd learned each family's particular preferences. The Rashids made me sleep in their dead son's bed, unwashed for 3 years, wearing his clothes that still smelled like grave soil. They paid my parents extra to keep me during his death anniversary so I could eat his favorite foods at his grave, pretend to be him returning. Mrs. Rashid would hold my face in the candlelight and weep, calling me Ahmed, and I'd have to say, I love you too, mama, or she'd scream. But the Nasirs were the worst. They believed lone children were spiritually pure, untainted by their own family's sins. Every full moon, they'd take my blood. Just a small vial, they said, for blessing their house. They'd mix it into their garden soil, convinced it would make them fertile. Other families started requesting me specifically because I was proven blessed, which translates to, I was still somehow alive after so many loans, and I never had any other friends who were lone children, because anytime I'd make one, they'd mysteriously disappear. And one day, I found out why. Living with the Amars, I found their previous lone child's diary hidden inside a hollowed-out Quran. Salma, 15, had written down everything. How Mr. Amar had started checking if she was becoming a woman, how they'd planned to marry her to their disabled adult son. Lone children made perfect brides because no family would investigate too closely. I furrowed my eyebrows. They told me she'd run away the night before the wedding. The last entry just said, tomorrow they come for me. If someone finds this, I was a somebody's daughter once too. That's when I knew I was living on borrowed time. And that's how the broadcasts were born. In every house I stayed in, I volunteered to help with their electronics. If anyone suspected something, I could just smile and suddenly I was the sweet little borrowed daughter. So helpful with modern things. Little did they know, when their backs were turned, I was building tiny radio transmitters from parts scavenged at the electronics bazaar, hidden inside old radios, televisions, computers, all tuned to the same pirate frequency. I taught other lone children the code. During the afternoon prayer call, when the loudspeakers drowned out everything else, we'd communicate through broadcasts. Quick bursts of information in children's voices. The Mahmoods are preparing adoption papers. The Khalid's lone child has bruises shaped like fingers. Amina hasn't been seen for 2 weeks. Sometimes I'd hear a new voice join, shaky and scared. This is Sarah. I'm 8. Please, someone remember my name. We hid the receivers and toys at the market, tuned them to play our frequency. Children would suddenly hear whispers between cartoon songs. Servants would catch fragments while cleaning. Slowly, the whole village was accidentally eavesdropping on our network. By 15, I'd lived with 20 families. My body was a map of their obsessions. Scars from the Rashid's grief rituals, burn marks from the Hassan's test to see if I had evil eye, a permanent twitch from the Ibrahim's experimental anxiety medications they needed someone to try first. My parents praised my resilience, raised their prices. Premium goods. The Mahmoods took me when I was 16. They had a different use for lone children. Their daughter needed a kidney. Better to take from borrowed goods than risk their own child. We've done it before, they told me calmly. The surgery was scheduled for the Harvest Festival. The whole village would be celebrating. Too loud to hear anything from their basement. They'd already paid my parents for a year-long loan with a bonus for unexpected medical needs. Papers signed, money counted, but we were ready. That night, as the Mahmoods prepared their sterile room, every radio, television, and computer in the village suddenly switched on. 53 devices, all playing the same broadcast. Not our usual whispers, full recordings. 3 years of evidence streaming into every home. The Imam negotiating prices for looking away. The Yusuf discussing which poisons to test next. The Amars describing how they'd handled Salma's body. But the crown jewel was my parents. Every negotiation, every price increase, every time they'd laughed about how I'd probably last until 18 if they were careful. She's strong stock. My mother's voice crackled through the speakers. Built for lending. It was the same voice that used to sing me lullabies. The village square filled within minutes, not with celebrating families, but with horror-struck crowds hearing their neighbors' confessions echo from every electronic device. The Mahmoods stood frozen in their basement, surgical instruments gleaming under the harsh lights as their own recorded voices filled the air above us. Mrs. Mahmood's face went white as she heard herself discussing previous donations from lone children. Mr. Mahmood's hands trembled as he reached for the scalpel they'd prepared for me. I backed toward the surgical table, my fingers finding the cold metal instruments they'd laid out so carefully. For the first time in months, I felt my real name rising to my lips. Not Amira, not Ahmed, not any of the borrowed identities I'd worn like ill-fitting clothes. My actual name, the one my parents had given me before they'd turned me into merchandise. Mrs. Mahmood lunged forward, her carefully maintained composure shattering. Her scream tore through the sterile room as she reached for me, but Mr. Mahmood caught her arm. His face had gone from shock to calculation in seconds. He straightened his surgical gown and spoke with chilling calm. The surgery would continue. No one would believe a hysterical child over grieving parents who'd taken in a troubled girl out of charity. The words had barely left his mouth when footsteps thundered overhead. The broadcast had done its work. The village was coming. I grabbed the nearest scalpel, but not to defend myself. Instead, I slashed at the IV bags hanging from their stands, flooding the sterile floor with sedatives meant to keep me unconscious during the harvest. The clear liquid spread across the tiles, mixing with the antiseptic smell that made my stomach turn. Then I heard it, my birth mother's voice cutting through the chaos upstairs. She wasn't asking if I was safe or calling for help. She was demanding to know where her daughter was because I was worth nothing now. The Mahmoods exchanged a look of dawning horror. They'd expected anger from the village, but not this. My own parents ready to pin everything on them to save themselves. The basement door rattled as more people gathered above. I had seconds to decide. Race up the stairs into that crowd or stay hidden while the Mahmoods faced the mob. They might reveal my location to save themselves. Might trade my whereabouts for mercy. My legs tensed to run. I chose the stairs, taking them 2 at a time, but stopped short at the top. Hassan blocked the doorway. The Mahmood's current son, the boy who was supposed to assist in my surgery. He stood there trembling, caught between worlds. Behind him, the noise of the crowd grew louder. 3 crises exploded at once. The mob pounded on the front door demanding entry. Mrs. Mahmood rushed past us up the stairs and I could hear her destroying evidence in the rooms above. Papers burning, computers smashing. And Hassan, sweet Hassan, who'd helped me hide transmitters in the Mahmood's own television, whispered the words that changed everything. They had his sister in the shed. His sister was 6 years old. I'd heard her voice on our broadcast sometimes, small and frightened, asking someone to remember her name was Yasmin. If I freed her, we'd leave witnesses to the attempted surgery. The Mahmoods couldn't claim I'd imagined everything with Hassan and his sister able to testify, but fleeing meant abandoning another child to certain retaliation. The Mahmoods had recovered from their shock. Mr. Mahmood's voice carried up from the basement, desperate now. They'd found my transmitter in their radio yesterday. Who else knew? How many more devices were hidden? They were fishing for information while pretending to know everything, trying to gauge how deep their exposure went. Hassan's confession came in broken whispers. He'd been reporting to them for months. Every move I made, every child I'd taught to broadcast. They'd promised to keep his sister safe if he helped them. They'd threatened to sell her to the Yusufs for their experiments if he refused. The betrayal should have stung, but I understood. We all did what we had to for survival. The front door splintered under the mob's assault. Hassan and I raced to the shed, our feet slipping on the wet grass. Inside, we found more than just his sister. Stacks of medical records lined the walls, detailed files on every lone child the Mahmoods had treated. Some had recovered, others had had complications. The ones marked with red X's had never left at all. My blood type was circled on a chart marked as universal donor, priority harvest. The mob found us before we could process it all. But instead of the rescue I'd imagined, several lending families pushed to the front, demanding their property back. The Yusufs wanted their current loan child returned immediately. The Rashids insisted I belonged to them for another month. A grotesque auction began as children cowered in the shed, families arguing over who had rightful claim to which child. The imam arrived with several elders, their robes billowing as they pushed through the crowd, but they hadn't come to help. Their priority was containing the situation, handling it internally before outsiders learned of what they called our blessed tradition. The imam's face was tight with controlled fury, not at the abuse, but at the exposure. My birth father materialized from the crowd, carrying a box I recognized from home. Inside were my baby photos, my childhood diary, documents he'd saved for this exact moment. He held them up for everyone to see, his voice carrying over the chaos. I'd always been disturbed, he announced. Look at these diary entries about imaginary friends. But I knew the truth. Those imaginary friends were other lone children who'd disappeared. The dates in my childish handwriting matched when they'd vanished. The village's infrastructure turned against us with coordinated precision. The internet cafe's connection died. Mobile phones stopped working. The electronics shop owner's brother had cut communications to prevent the story from spreading beyond our borders. We were trapped in a bubble of silence. Other lone children were being quickly collected by their birth families. Parents who'd rented them out for years suddenly claimed they needed to protect them, but protection meant silence. I watched as children who'd found courage to speak were bundled into cars, their mouths covered by familiar hands. The imam produced a folder of documents, his voice steady as he addressed the crowd. Everything was legal, he assured them. I'd been signed over to the Mahmoods for medical guardianship months ago. The attempted surgery was technically within their rights. The documents were dated before my mother's recorded conversation about strong stock. They'd been planning this far longer than I'd realized. Desperate to shift the narrative back to truth, I shouted about Salma's diary, telling the crowd where I'd hidden the real pages. But the Amars were ahead of me. They'd already replaced it with a forgery, pages filled with the fantasies of a troubled girl who'd run away from a loving home. Mr. Amar held up the fake diary like evidence of my delusions. Then came the betrayal that cut deepest. Amina stepped forward from the crowd, my closest ally among the lone children, the girl who'd helped me build our first transmitter. She rolled up her sleeves to reveal bruises on her arms. Her voice shook as she claimed I'd given them during one of my episodes. Her eyes met mine for a second, terrified and apologetic, before she looked away. Later, I'd learned her birth family had threatened to loan out her younger siblings if she didn't lie. The crowd's sympathy shifted like sand. 3 more lone children came forward with similar stories. Their words painted me as the disturbed instigator while their eyes begged for forgiveness. One child mouthed sorry, even as she condemned me. We taught them too well to survive at any cost. The Mahmoods had recovered their confidence. Mrs. Mahmood produced consent forms, documents allegedly signed by me agreeing to donate my kidney to save a dying child. The signatures were close enough to fool anyone who didn't look carefully. They'd been practicing my handwriting. My only adult ally wavered next. The young teacher who'd returned from university, who'd helped some children access books about their rights, stood at the edge of the crowd. The imam's gaze found her, and his reminder was soft but clear. Her teaching position depended on community approval. She stepped back into the shadows. I played my last card, revealing that everything in the basement was still being recorded. The surgical equipment had built-in monitoring systems, and the red light had been blinking throughout our confrontation. Surely that evidence would matter. The imam smiled. Illegal recordings had no legal standing, he explained patiently. If anything, it proved my criminal mindset, my premeditation in violating the Mahmood's privacy. The law protected them, not me. With nowhere else to turn, no allies left standing, no evidence that wouldn't be twisted against me, I made a choice that would haunt me forever. I grabbed the nearest oil lamp and threw it at the medical records. Better to destroy evidence than let them suppress or alter it. The flames caught quickly on the old paper, and soon the shed was ablaze with the history of every child they'd harvested. The Mahmoods shifted tactics immediately, tears streaming down their faces as they addressed the growing crowd. They'd taken in a sick child out of charity, they explained, showing receipts for expensive psychiatric medications. The receipts were real. I recognized the pharmacy stamps, but I knew they'd sold those pills to other families. Their performance was flawless, each sob perfectly timed as they described my violent episodes and delusions. Other lending families joined their narrative, adding layers to my supposed madness. The Khalids spoke of finding me talking to walls. The Ibrahims mentioned my refusal to take medications. Each family contributed a piece to the false history they were constructing, and I watched it solidify into truth before the crowd's eyes. Mrs. Rashid pushed through the mob, holding something that made my blood freeze, a photograph of me smiling in her dead son's clothes, sitting at his birthday celebration. The image twisted my memories. Had I been happy? Was I remembering wrong? My hands shook as I stared at my own face, unable to reconcile the smile with the horror I remembered. The crowd murmured, their sympathy shifting. Hassan's sister appeared next, coached to perfection. The 6-year-old approached me with wide, innocent eyes, asking why I told Hassan to lie about the surgeries. A hospital bracelet circled her tiny wrist, evidence of some recent treatment that would support whatever story they'd crafted. Her voice carried across the square, more damaging than any adult accusation could have been. My own voice suddenly echoed from someone's phone. The Mahmoods had recorded my grief-stricken rants after failed escape attempts, edited to remove context. My desperate pleas for freedom sounded like threats against the families. My sobbing promises to expose them became the ravings of a disturbed teenager. They'd turned my pain into their weapon. The village council convened an impromptu hearing right there in the square. The imam positioned himself as judge while lending families lined up as witnesses. Lone children were ushered away, supposedly for their protection, but I knew it was to prevent them from speaking. The mockery of justice unfolded under the stars, lit by the still-burning shed. To prove my sanity, I had to violate Salma's trust. I'd hidden her real diary pages separately, knowing the Amars might find the original. Now I had to retrieve them, exposing not just her secrets, but those of other children she'd written about. My hands trembled as I thought of her words becoming evidence, her private pain displayed for people who'd enabled it. I ran to the imam's own office, where I'd hidden the pages during a cleaning punishment months ago. The crowd followed, curious about my desperation. Behind his desk, tucked inside religious texts, were Salma's pages, and accidentally, his financial records. Ledgers showing payments from lending families, bribes disguised as charitable donations. The imam's face darkened as I pulled both free. The young teacher I'd counted on for support stepped forward, but not to help. She announced her engagement to the electronics shop owner's son, explaining how my broadcast had nearly destroyed her future family's business. Her university education had taught her about progress, she said, but tradition held communities together. She wouldn't let my delusions tear apart the village's fabric. Desperate, I tried turning the families against each other. I announced that the Yusufs had used the Rashid's dead son as a poison tester before his death. The crowd gasped, but both families simply looked at each other and nodded. They'd known all along. Their alliance against me was stronger than any grievance between them. The imam called for order, announcing that decisions must be made immediately. Either I accepted treatment for my delusions, or faced charges for destroying property and inciting panic. The burning shed crackled behind us, a reminder of my desperation. He spoke of mercy, of helping a troubled child, while his eyes promised consequences. My birth mother approached during a lull in the proceedings. She pulled me aside, her grip tight on my arm. She'd believe me, she whispered, if I came home and never spoke of this again. The family's reputation mattered more than justice. She admitted knowing everything but valued our social standing above truth. Her fingers left bruises that would last longer than her words. The Mahmoods produced commitment papers for a psychiatric facility they partially owned. Other troubled lone children had been sent there, they mentioned casually. My worst fear materialized, being locked away where my testimony testimony would be forever discredited, where medications would blur my memories until I couldn't distinguish truth from delusion. The imam offered an alternative: leave the village forever with a small sum of money and a vow of silence, or be institutionalized for my own good. The choice was mine, he said generously, as if imprisonment and exile were gifts. The crowd waited for my answer, some hoping I'd disappear, others eager to see me committed. I refused both options, standing my ground despite trembling legs. The damage was already done, though. Even lone children who believed me now saw me as too dangerous to support. Association with me meant risking their own precarious positions. One by one, they turned away when I looked for support in their faces. Everything changed when I realized the families had discovered some transmitters recently. They were hunting for the rest, checking every electronic device in the village. Each hidden transmitter was now a ticking bomb that could implicate the children who'd helped place them. The hunt was systematic, methodical, and terrifying in its efficiency. The true scope of the crisis emerged slowly. Not all families had known about the broadcast initially, but they were quickly uniting to protect the system. The imam coordinated damage control with practiced efficiency, assigning tasks to contain the scandal. Families who'd been rivals for generations now worked together against the common threat I represented. My victories in teaching children to broadcast had backfired spectacularly. Each transmission location could be traced to specific children. The families compared notes, identifying patterns, marking which children had been where during broadcasts. My network became a map leading directly to every child who'd helped me. Marwa faced an impossible choice when her parents confronted her. She'd been my most trusted ally, helping coordinate broadcasts across the village. Now her parents showed her contracts already drawn up for her 3 younger siblings. Support me, and watch her siblings enter the loan system, abandon me, and keep them safe. The choice was crushing, but inevitable. She approached me in front of everyone, publicly denouncing my actions. Her words were harsh, calling me a troublemaker who'd endangered innocent children. But as she spoke, she pressed something into my palm, a hand-drawn map showing where crucial evidence was hidden. Her sacrifice cut deeper than any betrayal could have. I adopted their tactics out of necessity, becoming what they'd accused me of being. I suggested to grieving families that their children's deaths might not have been natural. The seeds of doubt I planted were calculated to turn allies into enemies. I hinted at affairs, secrets gathered from years in different homes, threatening to reveal them unless families questioned the loan system. Breaking into the electronics shop at night, I searched for evidence of the conspiracy's depth. Instead, I found something worse: loan contracts dating back decades, including one with my pregnant mother's photograph. Payment negotiations were detailed next to her smiling face. The truth hit like a physical blow. I hadn't been born and then loaned out. I'd been conceived as an investment. Hassan emerged as a secondary threat, revealing he'd made his own deal, helped contain the situation in exchange for legal adoption and his sister's protection. He led a group of loan children who'd been promised real families if they helped silence me. They saw me not as a liberator, but as the person threatening their only chance at belonging. Fighting a two-front war drained my resources quickly. The lending families wanted me institutionalized, while Hassan's group actively hunted for evidence I'd hidden. I slept in the abandoned Dovecote, stealing food from market stalls, using the last battery power and stolen phones to search for remaining transmitters. Exhaustion became my constant companion. A confrontation at the market turned disastrous when the Amars produced a girl they claimed was Salma. She was the right age, traumatized enough to be believable, and coached to perfection. I couldn't prove she was an imposter without revealing details only the real Salma would have shared. The crowd accepted her return as proof of my delusions about her death. The Dovecote, our last safe meeting place, was discovered when construction workers arrived. The families had hired them to build a new library, they claimed, but I knew the truth. They were destroying every place lone children had found refuge. The workers found evidence of our gatherings: hidden food, blankets, the remnants of hope. Rock bottom felt like drowning in daylight. I was alone, discredited, hunted by both the families and the children I'd tried to save. When I approached lone children for help, they turned away, fear replacing any gratitude they might have felt. My revolution had made their situations worse, not better. My birth father visited with an ultimatum that shattered my last illusions about family: return home and publicly apologize, or he'd sign papers making me a ward of the state, eligible for indefinite loans. He showed me contracts from 3 families already bidding for me. My rare blood type and proven resilience made me valuable inventory. I struck back with the only weapon left: information that would hurt everyone equally. I revealed the imam's affair to his wife, knowing the consequences would be catastrophic. She burned down the mosque's record room in her rage, destroying decades of marriage and death certificates. Evidence of disappeared children went up in smoke alongside proof of the imam's indiscretions. 3 elderly women searching for their grandchildren's death records were caught in the fire. They suffered smoke inhalation, becoming my unintended victims. The Mahmouds visited them in the hospital, tearfully taking responsibility for not getting me help sooner. They turned my victims into character witnesses against me. Even lone children who still believed me began distancing themselves when I asked them to steal medical files from the hospital. I couldn't promise their safety anymore. My desperation had made me dangerous to everyone, including those I wanted to protect. The revolution was eating its own children. To access the psychiatric facility's records, I had to publicly confess to delusions and submit to evaluation. It was a trap, but I needed to know what happened to lone children who were committed. Inside, I found intake records proving they were medicated into compliance, but the same files showed I exhibited genuine trauma symptoms that would be used against me. The evaluation period was suddenly shortened when the Mahmoud's daughter's condition worsened. They needed an organ donor within days, and my blood type was perfectly compatible. The staff increased their assessments, looking for any reason to declare me mentally incompetent and unable to refuse donation. The family's true goal crystallized with terrifying clarity. They didn't just want me silenced, but erased. My organs would be distributed to save the lending family's real children. My rare blood type and proven resilience made me the perfect donor for multiple children, a final use for what my mother had called strong stock. Inside the facility, I pretended to be another patient's daughter to access restricted areas. The woman had lost her real daughter, a lone child who disappeared years ago. She called me by the wrong name, held my face like Mrs. Rashid had, and I played along. Every moment of deception felt like betrayal of both her loss and my identity. To escape, I convinced genuinely disturbed patients that the staff were plotting against them. I used their paranoia as a weapon, their legitimate mental illness as a tool. When they created chaos, demanding to see imaginary lawyers and calling for help from hallucinated relatives, I slipped away in the confusion. My transformation into a manipulator was complete when I planted evidence of medication theft on a cruel orderly. He'd been abusing patients, and I used his crimes to create my diversion. Watching security drag him away while he protested innocence, I realized I'd become everything they'd accused me of being. I escaped with copied files proving the lone children's institutionalization, but returned to find the village had moved on. New children were already in the loan system, wearing the same fearful smiles I remembered. The cycle had barely paused. My revolution had been a stone thrown into water, ripples that disappeared without changing the flow. The families immediately undermined my evidence by revealing my legitimate diagnosis: PTSD and dissociation. The evaluation had concluded. Every symptom matched my behavior. The truth of trauma and the appearance of madness were medically indistinguishable. They'd turned psychology into a weapon against me. The real battle wasn't legal justice, but a war for the next generation. My credibility was destroyed while theirs remained intact. They could continue the system with minor modifications, claiming they'd addressed the unfortunate incident I'd caused. The lone children would be treated better, they promised, while nothing fundamental changed. Every family had tried to turn against each other instead bonded over their shared threat. They created a unified front to protect what they now called the old ways, as if antiquity justified atrocity. Former rivals shared resources to maintain the system that benefited them all. Some lone children who'd started to resist shifted allegiance when their birth families offered them positions as future lenders. They could rise from property to proprietor if they helped maintain the system. The promise of power corrupted faster than any threat could have. My final legal option collapsed when I learned the regional judge was the imam's cousin. The prosecutor's daughter had received a kidney from a lone child. The entire legal system benefited from the organ pipeline. Justice was impossible when those meant to dispense it profited from injustice. Desperate, I returned to the Mahmoud's medical facility to broadcast from inside. The surgical equipment was still there waiting for its next victim. I transmitted for 17 minutes before being discovered, naming names and revealing locations. But the response revealed a horrible truth. Many parents listening already knew and were waiting their turn to benefit. The broadcast's aftermath brought swift retaliation. My own words from the psychiatric evaluation echoed through the facility's speakers. Violent fantasies about the families, genuine but taken out of context. The staff rushed to contain me while families outside heard their children's potential savior revealed as someone who'd fantasized about their destruction. The Mahmouds had weaponized my trauma responses perfectly. A sympathetic nurse slipped me a memory card during the chaos, her hands shaking as security approached. The tiny device contained hidden camera footage of forced sedations and organ compatibility screenings. She'd risked everything to provide evidence, and within hours, her 6-year-old daughter appeared on the loan registry. The message was clear: help me and lose your children. Hassan's sister found me hiding in the facility's laundry room. The 6-year-old's innocent question about why I was hurting everyone when Hassan took such good care of her now pierced deeper than any accusation. She didn't understand that her brother had traded his soul for her safety. The child's genuine confusion forced me to face what I'd become. I crossed my final moral line by telling her the truth about Hassan's bargain. Watching comprehension dawn in those young eyes, seeing innocence shatter as she understood her brother's sacrifice, marked the moment I truly became the monster they'd painted me as. She ran crying, and I knew Hassan would never forgive me for stealing his sister's ability to love him freely. The families turned my own methods against me with surgical precision. Recordings of my threats, edited but real, played on every device in the village. They'd collected months of desperate rants, violent fantasies, and breakdown moments. Without context, I sounded exactly like the dangerous terrorist they claimed I was. My investigation had created all the evidence they needed. Every family I'd exposed now had legal grounds for action. The affairs I'd revealed became blackmail charges. The medical information I'd shared violated privacy laws. The secrets I'd threatened to expose transformed into criminal admissions. My victories had become a comprehensive confession of crimes. The lone children I'd taught to document everything had unknowingly created the perfect record of my descent. Their careful notes, meant to protect them, now painted me as the instigator who'd corrupted innocent children. They'd been trained too well. Every date, time, and interaction meticulously recorded from their perspective. The Mahmoud's daughter's complete kidney failure accelerated everything. They broadcast her deteriorating condition hourly, showing the innocent child who would die without immediate donation. The village watched a girl my age struggling to breathe, machines keeping her alive, while I hid like the selfish criminal they'd convinced everyone I was. The Harvest Festival arrived with its traditional celebrations, but this year's theme was healing from disruption. New lone children were presented to families, their fearful smiles identical to mine 12 years ago. The system had adapted, now including consent forms and medical oversight that made everything appear legitimate while changing nothing fundamental. Both sides had reached mutual destruction. I was documented as an arsonist who'd burned evidence, a blackmailer who'd threatened families, a disturbed teenager who'd fantasized about violence. They were exposed as child abusers, organ harvesters, and human traffickers. Neither side could pursue justice without ensuring their own downfall. The imam proposed his peace terms in the community center, speaking of forgiveness and moving forward. Donate 1 kidney voluntarily, leave forever, never speak of this again, and the loan system would be reformed with proper oversight. The reform meant paperwork that legitimized what they'd always done, protection that existed only on paper. A massive sandstorm trapped everyone inside the community center, forcing all parties into proximity. The Mahmouds wheeled their dying daughter into the main hall, her labored breathing audible even over the wind. The visual impact was devastating, an innocent child dying while her potential savior hid among the crowd. Lone children began speaking up, emboldened by my example but offering testimonies that complicated my narrative. Some spoke of families who'd been kind, education they'd received, opportunities they'd never have had otherwise. Others confirmed abuse but blamed me for making their situations worse. The truth fractured into dozens of perspectives. The teacher who'd betrayed me arrived with security footage from the past 2 weeks. The recordings showed my desperate acts, breaking into buildings, threatening families, recruiting children for dangerous activities. But timestamps also revealed recent organ harvest planning meetings. The evidence cut both ways, too recent to prove the decades-long conspiracy, but damning for everyone involved. The footage's most devastating revelation was that the Salma imposter and other supposedly returned children were trafficked replacements. The real children had been sold, not called, making everyone complicit in an even darker cover-up. Families who'd thought they were protecting tradition discovered they'd been enabling child trafficking. No clean victories emerged as the village fractured. Some families wanted genuine reform, horrified by the trafficking revelation. Others insisted tradition justified everything. Lone children split between those seeking revenge and those desperate to salvage any chance at normal lives. The unity I'd forced through exposure crumbled into chaos. The moment of choice arrived when the Mahmoud's daughter went into crisis. Medical equipment was wheeled in, and a surgeon prepared for emergency transplant. I could save her and gain hollow redemption, or refuse and watch a child die. The choice they'd engineered was perfectly cruel. Save a life by rewarding the system that had destroyed so many. I chose a third option, standing to announce my agreement but with conditions. Every current lone child must be returned to birth families first. No new contracts until the old ones were void. The dying girl became my hostage just as I'd been theirs. Her life depended on them dismantling their own system. Families scrambled to retrieve their loaned children, but several children refused to return. Despite abuse, some had found better lives than their birth families offered. The complexity I'd refused to acknowledge surfaced. Not every loan arrangement was purely evil, even within a corrupt system. The surgery proceeded after hours of negotiations. I watched them prepare me, knowing I was saving my tormentor's daughter while enabling the system's continuation. The Mahmoud's tears seemed genuine as they thanked me, but I saw calculation behind their gratitude. They'd won by making me complicit. Recovery happened in the same basement where everything had started. The successful transplant was celebrated as proof the system could work with proper oversight. My sacrifice became evidence of reformation rather than resistance. They'd transformed my last act of defiance into validation of their methods. The imam presented my exile papers while I was still weak from surgery. A bus ticket to the capital, enrollment documents for a job training program, and a legal agreement never to return. The document's language made me the villain who'd been shown mercy, the disturbed girl given a second chance through the village's compassion. My birth parents visited once before I left. They brought a new baby, already negotiating loan terms with the Rashids. The infant's cry echoed through the hospital room as they discussed prices, their voices casual while planning another child's commodification. They didn't look at me once during the visit. Hassan's group ensured my final humiliation by returning the evidence I'd hidden. Every piece of proof I'd scattered was collected and delivered to the imam, who burned it publicly. The lone children who'd helped hide it watched the destruction. Understanding their complicity bought them protection. The bus to the capital carried me away from everything I'd known. Through the window, I watched the village return to normal. New transmitters were being removed from electronics, but no one would build more. The loan system continued with contracts and medical forms that made everything legal. My revolution had only taught them to hide better. The promised job training led to work at a children's advocacy center in the capital. The irony wasn't lost on me, helping urban children while legally barred from the village where hundreds still suffered. My criminal record, carefully crafted by the imam's documentation, ensured I could never work with law enforcement or social services. Years passed in the shadow of failure. The advocacy center handled standard cases, custody custody disputes, school bullying, family conflicts. Nothing like the loan system that continued 300 miles away. I processed paperwork and organized files, my past reduced to nightmares and scars. The cycle's continuation revealed itself in a phone call 3 years later. A young voice, trembling and desperate, whispered familiar words. Sarah, 8 years old, begging someone to remember her name. The same name from our broadcasts, but a different child. The system had evolved, adapted, and survived. I held the phone, listening to her describe the Nasir's blood rituals, the Rashid's grief ceremonies, families whose names I knew intimately. She'd found an old transmitter, one we'd missed, and managed to call the only number programmed into it. My advocacy center's hotline, a final connection I'd established before exile. The legal barriers prevented direct action. I couldn't return, couldn't report to authorities who benefited from the system, couldn't even advise her beyond generic safety tips. All I could do was listen, remember her name, and know that somewhere in my village, children still whispered into radios, still hoped someone was listening, still disappeared when they became too troublesome. My revolution had achieved its only lasting victory, teaching them to hide better, to legalize their crimes, to present corruption as tradition worth preserving. The lone children learned to survive within the system rather than resist it. The families learned to document consent they'd coerced. Everyone learned to perform legitimacy, while continuing exactly as before. The phone call ended with Sarah's whispered promise to be good, to stop causing trouble, to accept her role. I recognized the defeat in her voice, the same acceptance I'd fought against for so long. Another child learning that resistance only made things worse, that compliance was the only survival strategy that worked. I returned to processing urban custody disputes and school bullying reports, each case a reminder of problems that seemed trivial compared to what continued in my village. The children I helped didn't know about loan systems or organ harvests or tradition that consumed its young. They complained about divorced parents and mean teachers while Sarah endured another month with the Nasirs. The advocacy center's walls displayed success stories, children reunited with safe families, bullies held accountable, systems that actually protected the vulnerable. None of it reached the village where my name was forbidden, where my revolution was remembered as a cautionary tale about disturbed children who didn't appreciate tradition's blessings. My desk drawer held the only evidence that remained, the memory card the nurse had given me filled with footage too recent to prove historical abuse. Sometimes I watched it, reminding myself it had all been real. Other times I wondered if the families were right, if trauma had twisted my memories, if I'd imagined horrors where only tradition existed. The work continued, small victories in a city that didn't know about lone children. I helped a boy escape an abusive coach, assisted a girl in reporting a predatory teacher, guided families through proper channels that actually functioned. Each success felt hollow compared to the hundreds still trapped in the system I'd failed to destroy. Late nights brought calls from other advocacy centers, reports of children with familiar symptoms, the specific trauma patterns of lone children who'd escaped to cities. I could recognize them instantly but couldn't explain how. The official story of my disturbed past prevented anyone from taking my insights seriously. My supervisor praised my dedication while limiting my responsibilities. The criminal record the imam had crafted marked me as reformed but potentially unstable. I processed paperwork, answered phones, and organized files, saved tasks for someone with my documented history of delusions and violence. 10 years after exile, I still worked at the same desk, still answered the same phones, still heard occasional whispers from children who'd found old transmitters. The loan system had evolved into something more subtle, more legal, more permanent. My revolution's only legacy was teaching them to perfect their cruelty. The ending came not with justice, but with exhaustion. Another Sarah called, another 8-year-old begging to be remembered. I took her information, filed the report that would go nowhere, and added her name to the list I couldn't officially keep. The cycle continued, and I continued witnessing it from a distance, legally barred from the village where children still disappeared. My final act of resistance was simply remembering every name, every voice, every child who'd called over the years. Sarah, Yasmin, Ahmed, Fatima, dozens of names recycled as new children filled old roles. I remembered them all, even if I couldn't save them. In a system designed to erase identity, memory itself became rebellion. The phone rang again. Another child, another desperate whisper, another name to remember. I answered as I always did, professional and limited, offering what comfort legal boundaries allowed. The revolution had failed. The system had adapted, but someone was still listening. Even if that was all I could do, listen, remember, and know that 300 miles away, children still hoped someone would remember their names.